Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Complexity Lounge, a meetup where we gather to talk about all things related to complexity and complex adaptive systems. I'm Jocko Selberg, and somewhere out there bringing her own very special order to chaos is the liminal Barbara Frontera, and together we co-host the lounge. Before we kick it off today, just a few quick ground rules. We will be recording today's session, so if you do not wish to be recorded, please make sure your camera and microphone are turned off. Today, we'll be having a few breakout sessions, so be ready for a little participatory engagement. Should you have a question or comment at any time, you can either raise your Zoom hand or just send your question directly to Barbara via the chat with a big Q in front, and she'll probably just ask you to read it out for yourself. And just a reminder that the recording will be posted to Vimeo on our Complexity Lounge page in the next few days, and that is where you will find all of our past videos from the lounge. Today, we welcome Mary Boone to the Complexity Lounge. Mary has a long career helping clients design strategic, complexity-based approaches to communication and leadership. She is the president of Boone Associates, and her books include Managing Interactively, The Information Edge, and Leadership and the Computer. Today, Mary will begin a conversation with Barbara about a question we often hear at the lounge, which is, how do we discuss complexity and complex related topics with leadership without coming across as overly theoretical or academic? And then we'll open up the floor for discussion. So with that, Mary Boone, welcome to the lounge.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. And Barbara, I'm going to turn to you for a second and ask you, because I want to keep looking at faces instead of the chat. What seems to be the prevailing themes in what people are hoping to get out of the session so far? Oh, that's right. We haven't asked that question of everybody else yet. That was just early.
Yeah.
Can we ask that now?
Yeah, Mary's asking that if you've just arrived, please put your hello and where you're from, your name and where you're from, and what you're hoping to get out of this session in the chat. Just briefly, just a sentence or two.
Yeah, just phrase or sentence of what you're hoping to get out of it. The reason I'm asking for you guys to do that is because I want to set expectations right up front. I mean, this is a significant chunk of time, and I know some of you can't stay for the whole thing, and you may have to drop in or come back, drop in and out. But I want to make sure that you're getting what you came for. And so I can't do everything. What we're really going to focus on today is, how are people applying complexity? What really applied complexity? How are people using various methods, and what are they using them for? I'm going to have that, a lot of that content is going to come from your peers on this session. I'm going to share some of the stuff I'm doing, but I also want to give you guys a chance to share what you're up to, what you're doing, how you're applying complexity. And then I also want to talk a little bit about, how do you go about approaching leaders, and really at the very outset. I think that last time Tony talked about how do you actually diagnose a problem in complexity, and he shared more, he shared content around that and had people in breakouts talking about that. I'm not going to focus so much on complexity concepts and principles. That's something that other people, like some of the people on this set, I know at least one person on this session knows a lot more about that than I do. And I think that I'm better served in helping you to think through, to hear from each other about cases and applications of things, and then how do you actually work with senior leaders to get them interested and engaged and willing to sponsor and implement the kinds of things that you come up with and that you co-design and co-deliver with your clients. I'm going to use the term clients. I know that all of you aren't consultants, and some of you are in organizations. I feel that you have, even if you're inside an organization, you have clients for concepts like this, because you're working with somebody that's trying to address a challenge or opportunity, and you're applying methods. And so I consider those internal clients. So when I use clients, think of that as either internal clients who are employees, or if you're a consultant, the external clients you're working with. So I want to harken back to, I don't know how many of you saw Tony's session, but it was really, I got a little nervous when I started watching the beginning of it, because I thought, oh my God, we're going to be talking about the same thing. But this whole notion of people getting the kind of deer in the headlights look when you start trying to talk about some of this stuff. He even used the same terminology there. So I want to try and help you clear up that deer in the headlights glance that you sometimes get from people, and try and make it more of an eager gaze of let's get started. So that's the purpose. I do want to say a little bit about participation. Some of you heard this up front if you came on early. This is going to be a highly participative session. I did, as I said up front, my research to look up everybody on LinkedIn and as much as possible know who's here and attending. And you, if you haven't done that, you would be amazed at the quality of the participants that you're looking at right now around you. These are some really, really, really seasoned people in complexity. And so I feel like it's really important that this be a multi-directional learning experience. And so I'm going to ask, I like to get a commitment around participation. If you're going to, if you don't like these kinds of things where you share things in breakouts, I've got a plan for them and everything. But if you don't like it, you may want to drop off, which is fine. Just please don't drop off in the middle of a breakout, because that's being, you want to be considerate to your fellow participants. And if you can only stay for part, I'm going to be signaling when we're going to have a breakout. So you may want to drop off for 30 minutes and come back in. And the second thing I'm going to ask you to do right up front is, does everybody have something to write with in a piece of paper close to hand? That old-fashioned thing. Please grab that while we get started here and start talking. And that's going to be important to the way we do the breakouts. You're going to see some complexity principles in action today, kind of as an undercurrent to this, because we're going to use some of that in how we run the session. So with that, Barbara and I were going to, there's a special question that Barbara says she likes to start with, so I'm going to let her articulate that.
I mean, Mary, you've had a career in management consulting and, things like that. You're an author, but how did you get involved with this crazy complexity stuff? I mean, we all know, we all have our origin story. What's yours?
Well, my background is in communication theory, organizational communication. I have undergraduate and graduate degrees in communication. And I've also been a bit of an autodidact in organizational behavior, because there's a lot of crossover between those two disciplines. And I've actually taught that a little bit. And I don't know if she's on, but there was somebody, I think it was Jen Briselli. I don't know if she's on or not, but she teaches at Northeastern in Camden. I also taught at Northeastern for 14 years. I taught organizational behavior online. So I had all this background in a social science background, essentially, because I was a communicator when we used to read across journals. We read in sociology, anthropology, psychology, social psych, because it was a new discipline. And so it was necessarily cross-disciplinary in the social sciences. And, in the process of that, I became very interested in how communication was going to really change organizational communication dramatically, and it certainly has. And I got involved with communication technologies a great deal and spent time working with IT people, helping them to connect business leaders with various collaboration tools. And you'll see how that's relevant in just a minute. And then I got exposed in I guess it was the mid 80s or early 80s, I got exposed to large group interventions or large group methods. And I don't know if Bruce is on, who signed up originally, but I was looking at his LinkedIn. It appears we have somebody in common, Harrison Owen. Harrison Owen, who invented open space, that was my first experience, was going to an open space meeting. And then I immediately got certified in it because I just thought it was amazing. And Harrison was my instructor to get certified. So I was very lucky. He just passed away a couple months ago, I think. And he is going to be missed. He's really amazing mind and a real pioneer. So then I wrote a book called Managing Interactively, where I'm incorporating all of this stuff. And this guy named Tony DeMarco, who I got corporate funding for the book. And I was asking him about people he knew that he thought I should talk with. And he said, well, there's this guy, Dave Snowden, you need to talk with. And that was a very auspicious meeting. And the first time Dave and I talked, I think we talked for like 2 hours. Is that right, Dave? You were.
I was fueled by whiskey, but
yeah, right. And I was so excited by Dave's ideas, and then so I interviewed him for the book Managing Interactively, and in the process of getting to know Dave, I really started learning about complexity. And Tom Stewart from HBR asked us to write that article together. So that was a huge change in my career, and that's when complexity, I started incorporating the ideas. And I saw a lot of connection between large group work. That large group was just kind of naturally had complexity components to it in some ways, at least the large group work I've been doing. So I've collaborated with Dave there was in particular a meeting that we did at Qualcomm where we really started integrating and working on a lot of methods and forms and ritual descent. And Dave, I'll pick on you a little bit here and say that I think when we were doing ritual descent at that meeting, and I said, we can't have everybody facing each other because it'll be too hard to do. And Dave said, well, we'll just get them to turn around. So that's how we kind of worked back and forth, and really, it was great. So that continued. Obviously, our collaboration has continued over the years. And now, more recently, I've been using SenseMaker, and I just love it. Yes. Pardon me? Somebody say something? I've been using SenseMaker, and I find that to be just an amazing tool. And in fact, most recently I used it with a client that I have out in Chicago, and it was very interesting because what we were doing is we were trying to look at what they wanted to look at how they could retain more women in the organization. So we worked really closely with Anna, and we came up with an approach that we ended up finding patterns, of course, in the data that they didn't even know were there. And it was also a great tool for kind of jolting the leaders out of their delusions of how things were and showing them how things actually were. And so I found it to be amazing. So in summary, most of my, I would say 99% of my work in complexity is really associated with Dave and Knevin and the work that we've done together. So I am not a philosopher. I'm definitely just a total pragmatist, applying this stuff where I see it fit. And then Dave and I go back and forth with me trying to help him translate it for people that are my level of intelligence. So I've used it. I use the Knevin framework a lot to help leaders understand just the basic difference between ordered and unordered contexts, and just getting them really basically to understand how they need to think differently about their work and what they think is control, that sort of thing. And then I also use complexity principles in designing large group interactions, and also both in-person, virtual, and hybrid meetings. And finally, anytime clients really want to know the answer to the question why when they're looking at stuff in their organizations, I'm really looking more to SenseMaker these days to do that, and looking for opportunities to do that. So that's pretty much that a long-winded answer to your question, but I do think it's an important one, Barbara, because I think it's important to get everybody to understand kind of where I'm coming from. But with that, I want to understand where you guys are coming from. And as I said before, this group is completely amazing. And so I want to really take this opportunity to let you guys learn what you're doing, right? That was something, again, that popped up in Tony's session was it was really helpful to people to say, oh my gosh, to find out how people really are doing things in organizations and how they're addressing complex problems. So I'm going to put up, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you guys, my screen is extremely dark, and I thought how appropriate for a complexity session. You know how, Dave, you always say, as through a glass darkly? Well, that's exactly what is going on for me. And it happened this morning and I can't diagnose it. So sometimes I can't see my cursor and sometimes things look really dark. So bear with me while I look around for things and try to find them. So apologies if there's any problems. Hold on. Let's see if this works. Whoops, nope. It didn't go on the right. Hold on a minute. Sorry. There we go. Now it'll work.
Is this the breakout room thing?
Nope.
Okay.
Yes, I'm going to talk about the breakout rooms in just a minute. Hold on.
Got it. Okay, there you go.
Okay. So here's what we're going to do. I want you guys to pull out that paper and pencil that you had before. And I want you to just jot down 1 or 2 complexity approaches you've used and how you've applied them to your work. And if you haven't done that yet, then I think the reason you're here is probably that you've at least looked into complexity approaches. So jot down 1 or 2 approaches that look interesting to you. I mean, maybe you want to use SenseMaker. Maybe you want to use some other approach. Just jot it down, especially if you've done something, and how you applied them. And then just take a minute to do that now, because I like to give people a minute to think about what is it that, before we go into the breakouts, giving everybody a chance to reflect for just a moment before we go in. So take a second to do that.
And Mary, while they're doing that, Kyle mentioned something in the chat that I'd also like to come back to after the breakouts and things, which is this idea of risk, right? When you're asking organizations to do something new, you're asking them to assume a certain level of risk.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Dave, we'll see you later. And how do you position that risk in terms of a complex adaptive system, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. We're going to talk about that.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that. Good.
Yep.
Because I think that's a really interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to articulate.
Hello? Okay. So has everybody got that? All set? Thumbs up? Got something? All right, great. All right, now the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to give you some instructions on what's going to happen when we get into the into your breakouts. All right. So
and I just want to say, for some people in the chat that are saying they don't know enough about this to participate, don't feel that way. I mean, the whole point of a meetup like this is as a learning experience. So please feel free to participate.
Yeah, and what I would say to you all is I think this would be a really, really beneficial breakout for you, because if you don't know anything at all about complexity, it's really helpful to find out what it helps with, right? Like if you can't figure out, like, where do I start? What do I do? I hear all these phrases and I'm reading all this stuff. I think it could be really helpful to find out, hey, what's actually, how have people used this stuff? How are they using it in their practices? So just be feel free to say, hey, I'm a newbie when you're in your breakout, because the people that are in there that are experienced will certainly understand that. They've all been newbies themselves before. So, and in the breakouts, it's an opportunity to also meet new people. So take 30 seconds each. You're going to be in groups of 4. I'd like for you to take about 30 seconds to just say who you are and where you're from. And then after you've done those little quick introductions, individually share the examples that you jotted down. Take about a minute per person to talk about that. And that would be the place where, if you're new to complexity, to say, hey, I don't have any real examples because I'm just getting started, but I'd love to hear what yours are. So that's the place where you could say that. And then I'm going to give you some time to discuss your examples. It'll be about 20 minutes or so. We'll see. I've got this kind of loosely timed out because last time when I watched the previous, Tony's session, people said they needed a little more time. So I'm going to say 20 minutes, but if we finish up earlier, if you guys are finished, just pop back into the main room. I will keep the timing. I'll send you broadcast messages so that you'll know when it's time to move from introductions to sharing your examples and then discussing your examples. I'll do that. And we'll leave this slide up so that you can, if you need to come back and ask any questions, you can. Okay. So it's really simple. You've got your examples of how you're applying complexity. Take them into the breakout. Introduce yourselves, share your examples, and then talk about them. Everybody got it? All right.
We're back.
Okay, great. So Mark just said that it would be great that it's always in the middle of something when you come back from breakout. And I asked, would it be helpful to have more time? And Carla said we'd fill the time that you had. I think that was you, Carla. I'm not sure.
Andrea.
Andrea. Okay, thank you. Sorry, it's kind of hard to see.
Yeah.
So what was it? Was it useful? Was the time useful? And if so, what were some of the things that you learned? And what was some of the really interesting applications you heard? And I'd especially like to hear from somebody that's a newbie too, who doesn't know much about complexity. So who wants to talk first?
Please raise your virtual hand. I think we all know how to do that. Or, you can ping me in the chat. Jamie has found his virtual hand.
Yes, it took me a second. I was in a group with David and Andrea, and they were fantastic. I feel like I'm a newbie to this. And I've read as I was telling them, I was introduced to this through a leadership program with the agency I work with. And it was Mary and Dave's articles what I was introduced to. And then I kind of started looking at other things along with like OODA loop and things of that nature. But having them, like I would say something and then Andrea and Dave were just like, hey, this is more like this. And they kind of, they reframed it for me, and they spoke much more eloquently and articulate than I could about the thing. And it helped me just kind of almost an epiphany. I'm almost there. I think I might be on the verge of it. But
Good.
just hearing them, what they went through, and I was like, hey, those are what I didn't think was complexity, or the way I was thinking was, a complexity, I guess, what would you call it? Ways of using it. I forgot the question was, but
yeah,
I didn't think I was thinking that way. But then I realized when they were explaining, they're going through like, maybe I am thinking it that way. I just don't realize it. So
awesome. Thank you, Jamie, for sharing that. Thanks for being a newbie and stepping up and doing it. Thank you. So who else had a really interesting, something they learned that was new in their conversation?
Come on, hands up. And by the way, Jamie, Andrea says that you're undermining your own eloquence.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, not underestimating, not undermining. Yes, you're underestimating your own eloquence. Okay.
Yeah. I'll hear both the comments, Andrea.
Yeah. So who else? One of you experienced people who've been using this stuff a bunch? We got a newbie that's brave enough to jump in. I know some of you have been doing some interesting work.
I mean, I was in a room with Fernando and Yulia and Rhea, and Fernando made a really interesting point because he was talking about Argentina and how people in Argentina existed in chaos for so long that they became acclimated to it.
Interesting.
And he teaches business. He teaches in a business school. And he said, I see a similar mindset in some startups and things where you become acclimated to the chaos and therefore, you know, sort of trying to, David has his hand up.
Great. David?
Go, David.
You got your mute on, David.
Sorry about that. I thought I had muted it. It's always hard on a cell phone to move around.
We all do it. We've all done it.
So I just to jump on Jamie's point, I don't consider myself a super expert, but I've done it. I've done SenseMaker and an unsurvey in Kenya with flower pickers and for a conference. And you know, I think the thing that I think we all got to the same place on is how hard it is to get people off two things. One of which is the not getting away from that root cause analysis and finding the solution, and the deep desire when you're in a meeting to get that solution, and not being comfortable with emergent solutions or the recognition it can be the network and the systems that don't answer to a single solution, but multiple probes and ways of dealing with. That was the first thing. The second thing I said, and I think Jamie was saying this as well, and Andrea maybe too, was this idea of, for me, when you try to get people to do more of these, less of these, and get granular on stuff, they all want to go in the sphere of people I work with, they all want to go to the 10,000 foot of policy and this, and it's all things that are sort of out of their control. And it's very hard to people to say, you actually can do things. And I think Andrea was saying something really amazing, which is like, we're caught between sort of the sense of powerlessness.
I think you froze.
To no one takes action. You know, I can't do anything personally, but these are the big things. I don't know if Andrea, that is quite accurate what you said, but those are two things I come up against all the time when trying to do complexity.
You just froze in the middle, that's all.
Yeah. Just froze for a second. That's okay.
I froze.
Well, you were saying that they go to the 10,000 foot and then we lost a couple of words, but I think we got the gist. Is essentially, I think what you were saying is, how do you get them to break their old habits of looking at things from the perspective that they've normally come from, and understand that the adjacent possible is full of good stuff, right? And that taking small steps, a lot of small steps. This happened to me a lot when I first started working in IT, working with people in IT departments. My job was to help people it was a new position called the internal consultant. And these were the people we were sending out into the businesses to go and talk to them about what they were trying to accomplish with their business. And they would always, they couldn't get out of their mindset of that they already knew what they wanted as a tool. And it was very hard to pull them back and say, wait a minute, let's better understand. We needed more context. We needed to understand what it was that they were trying to accomplish, because many, many times their solution, I called it, and I think Dave uses this term now too, I called it premature evaluation. Is they would jump to a solution too quickly. And so you're saying sometimes they also jump levels of abstraction too quickly, and it's very hard for them to come down. Is that right, David? Did I get that right? Is he still here?
No, he's not
Yes,
here.
I was just going on mute. Sorry. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And people would always point to some policy change versus when I asked them, what could you do? You know, what could you do? How could you support this? No, they're going like, well, we really need this policy change here. We need this thing done, or this thing's always pointing high or other. And I'm just saying, could you make a phone call? Could you And no
Great.
one could do this. It was amazing in this conference. No one could say, oh, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. They all were going like high level. We're all so brilliant in analyzing the problem at this level, but like, what could you do tomorrow?
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
weird.
I love that observation. I love that. And I think, Jocko, you were going to say something?
Yeah, yeah. As a corollary to that, I guess, is people will oftentimes jump those levels of abstraction and not realize they're doing it. So what I'll always do is I'll have them declare when they're doing it. They'll be jumping. At first, they know they're doing it, but eventually, they're like, well, which level? Where are we? What are we talking about specifically? And just clarify that when you're. It's fine to jump around because we're exploring the space, but just be clear where we are because there's a lag.
Yeah. Well, thanks you guys for giving those quick examples. I want to move on to Barbara and I were going to talk a little bit, and I want to get to Barbara's risk question. Actually, I can really start with the risk question and kind of also tie that to what David was just saying. And Jocko. So Barbara, are you ready to jump in?
Well, I should clarify that it was Kyle who mentioned risk in the chat. That risk was, and Kyle, if you want to jump in here and frame that a little bit, I'm happy to defer.
I think you covered it. It's really that proposing something so outside the norm, outside of the Taylor rulebook and the Six Sigma rulebook is a real risk. We've never done it before, and a lot of my stakeholders have regulators, and nobody wants to get in front of a regulator and say, we were trying something we've never tried before. And so that's always my challenge.
Yeah. Okay. Let me, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my slides again, because I want to get to some of this stuff. Hold on one second, because I think this will help frame up what I want to share with you now, which if I can only see my cursor there. Okay. So I'm going to give you some simple rules for speaking with execs. And I think the most important thing is this idea of how are we introducing this? Well, part of it, I think, is more about conversing rather than telling. I mean, there are a few people in the field of complexity who are just really geniuses at being able to do a presentation to senior executives and have all the light bulbs go on in the room. And, as we know, Dave Snowden's one of them. But not all of us have that same approach or that same ability or understanding of complexity that can allow us to really do it in broadcast mode, so to speak. I'm not saying don't ever do a presentation. I'm saying it's much easier to introduce these concepts in a more conversational way. At least that's what I've found. But those conversations should have what my friend Lisa Kimball, and I always love having a chance to let people know that Lisa Kimball was the inventor of the term liberating structure. And so you need a little bit of a liberating structure to your conversation with that executive. And that's all about doing your homework. And the first step is picking the right client, because if you don't have the right, some executives are so entrenched in their way of doing things that is very, very hard to pry them over to the other side, so to speak. And so finding someone who has natural curiosity about new things and also cultivating your own curiosity about what that person is doing and what they care about and what's their priorities or concerns are, that homework and your curiosity and their curiosity are really key, I think, to having a successful, or at least they have been for me. I've come across clients that I realized this is just not the right client or the right time for that client, for me to work with that client, because they're not ready to to open themselves up to thinking totally differently about their work. Or, and by work, I mean not just in a corporation, but also in nonprofits. I work a lot with nonprofits and other not-for-profit organizations. So, so doing your homework and preparing educated questions about what you think their priorities are going to be, or what you think they might be worried about. Because a lot of times I'll go into some of these conversations and the executives will be running at full speed. They haven't even thought about, you know, what is it that really is, what are their priorities? There's so much going on that trying to narrow it down to what some of the key things are, or key concerns or key challenges or opportunities are, can be a challenge. But if you do your homework, then you'll ask good questions about that and help them come to that determination. And then once you know that, once you know, they may say, I'm really concerned about how the impact that climate change is going to have in these 5 areas, or whatever it might be. Then you can focus in on what they care about and start interspersing or interweaving complexity concepts at appropriate points in the organization. And, you know, everybody, I think death by slide deck is maybe many conversations have been killed by slide decks. I think that if you want to send something like that outside of a conversation, or you want them to read something, you know, some people are curious enough, they may want to do that. But I think, you know, Dave's original talking about the Cynefin framework was about being able to draw it on the back of a napkin. And so I think keeping that kind of feeling in mind is important in some of these conversations, and really, really deep listening to what they are caring about. Don't worry and don't get wrapped up in your concerns about or feeling you're not ready to introduce some complexity concepts. Don't think about yourself. Think about them and deeply listen to them and take notes literally as they talk, for 2 reasons. One is people love to watch other people write when they're talking. It's the way it works. And then they also, for you, you know, there's been a lot of recent research into the fact that when you write things down, you remember them better. So those are 2 things. And then using stories and metaphors, you know, narrative and analogies to describe the complexity concepts. Don't go in with just definitions, go in with illustrations. And Dave Snowden and Tony had a bunch of them in his last presentation. There's an abundance of them out there. So, and they'll help you understand things better as well if you do your homework on coming up with some of those things. So putting the notion of risk back into this, all of these things will help mitigate that risk, because if you're talking to the right person who's ready to have that conversation, it makes it a lot easier to help guide them in a direction that is going to be better for them and better for you for the conversation. Do those things make sense? Questions, comments? I mean, do you guys do something totally differently, or does this all seem crazy, or does it seem right? Or yeah, Julia.
Hi, thanks a lot.
Well, hi. Wait, I have to tell you guys, Julia is my Facebook friend and liked one of my pictures the other day. I'm so excited to see you.
Hi, thanks.
Hi.
I just wanted to say that everything that you have just mentioned is somehow so much intertwining with the class I had last week on consulting and how to elicit the problem from the person who brings you the problem. Mm-hmm. And I think all the points that you have mentioned is actually this kind of strategy. How do I get to know what is your problem by not overriding, by asking the questions, clarifying questions, by, as you said, conversing, not in the point of drilling into, but in the point of trying to establish trust, establish understanding, and so on. So I think what you have mentioned very much overlaps with this consultancy inquiry. And correct me if I'm losing something.
No, it's absolutely. I mean, I've been a consultant for, do I really dare tell you how many years? Since early 1980s. And I've done a lot because I taught people to be internal consultants. I'm sure that a lot of the things that I've read and learned over the years are consistent with that. And Peter Block wrote that book, Flawless Consulting, and it's hard to beat that as a consulting skills book. It's a classic. It's been updated and changed, and a lot of things have been different. But unlike the Cynefin framework, there's something to the classics, right? And but I think what may be a little bit different is this notion of what I never have heard in anything about consulting is this notion of really bringing in metaphors and bringing in illustrations and stories. I think especially with complexity theory or complexity approaches, it's so important to do that because it's so easy to drop into jargon and drop into things that are going to turn people off or confuse them. And really, as we were talking right before, I think it was Surgeon, and we were talking before you guys came back from the breakout, complexity is all around us. There's examples of complexity that, you know, there's emergence all around us. You know, we're not inventing everything from scratch. And I think it's really easy to kind of fall back on just theory or labels. It's great to have theory. It's great to have labels so that we can be precise. But the people that are on the ground trying to apply this to challenges and opportunities, I'm of the thought that they only need to know that if they want to know that. Right? I mean, there's some theories that are important to share. There's some aspects of it that we need to pull out, but you know, we don't want to bombard them. Other observations, thoughts in your own approaches to people? Have you had a particularly good approach that worked with helping people understand complexity? Makes sense. I will say that the Cynefin framework has really been, you know, that's something I share with almost every client I ever have, if not every client, because just the basic premise, people, it's hard not to buy the basic premise that there's a difference between things that are ordered where you kind of know the answers and you got it all down, and things that are unordered. And when executives hear that basic concept, most of the executives I've ever talked with really respond to that because they recognize that that it's different in those different contexts. But when you start going deeper into things and you start wanting to do things like talking them into doing a large group event or talking them into doing SenseMaker, that's when you know it's a little bit more challenging. Yeah, Aaron.
Yeah, one thing that was mentioned in our group by Carla, which I really agree with, is I think journey mapping tends to be a really great inclusive approach because if you do enough of the homework, it tends to be something most can understand, right? You're not trying to introduce half a dozen frameworks to people who, you know, don't have technology backgrounds or strategy backgrounds, or, you know, and and then people get sort of wrapped up around trees around that. And whereas journey map, if it's especially using a lot of the visual thinking approaches I've seen, I'm a terrible drawer, not good. I'm awful. But the tools that you can use if you're not a very good drawer are pretty nice in that you can draw these really, I don't know, I guess the right way to put it, but sort of artistic flowing steps across personas, across different interactions. And I found that something sticks there with people when they see that. And it's only one, right? You can't have, like you said, a slide deck of those, right? That's absurd.
Yeah.
But if you have one, maybe a good introduction to the problem, and then your sort of first take or the group's first take at it, I found that to be a pretty powerful agenda setter, I guess would be the best way to put it. Because then if everybody has experience, assuming in that problem set, the journey map's going to quickly tease out those pieces that everybody has known for years probably are issues. And then that from there, you can, Kanban, you can tool up to get, hey, how are we going to try it, go after this again? And so I found that that's a pretty powerful tool. And a pretty easy one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a great suggestion. Yeah. Kyle, I want to get yours next, and then I'll answer.
David.
It had a question.
David has something.
Yeah, but Kyle, I think, was right.
Yeah, no, Kyle was first. Yeah, Kyle's first, and then right. David.
Well, thanks. So I'm glad you mentioned jargon. I sort of discovered early on that if I said complexity theory, that was the immediate dismissal of, cool, call me when you got something. It's not a theory anymore. That became a red flag word. I'm wondering, this is a community that is really specific about the language that it uses. And so I've started from learning that, but do you have any red flag words that you don't take out of this room into those client conversations?
Apoplectic.
Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah, is that a good one?
That's a good one. Yeah, I accidentally dropped it.
You gotta understand that I'm the person that argued with Dave and I don't know if Dave's back on, but he will confirm this. I argued with him for years about making it clear versus obvious. I mean, I'm all about the right terminology, but I also feel that you're right. There's some words that. And even this concept of complexity, I don't really necessarily say, okay, now I'm going to tell you about this from complexity theory. I just say, the client says to me, I am having a terrible time keeping my female employees, right? And so then we get into a conversation where I'm trying to get more context. And that's really what we're trying to do when we're having that conversation and we're doing things like asking them and writing and listening and writing things down. What we're doing is getting more context for understanding what really makes sense in a certain spot. I don't have to go through a lot of theory if I've talked to this person about what their challenge or opportunity is and I have a real handle on it and I've done my homework to start thinking, well, what if we ask people in the organization about what it's like working here, and then maybe that'll give us some clues as to what's going on with why women aren't here. And we could do that with a regular survey, or we could do it with something that really helps you get at the why. And I'll say something like, if you've got a Likert scale from 1 to 5, what's going to happen is every time somebody that's answering the question is going to want to make it 3.3, but they can't do that. They've got to put it into those discrete areas. And it's great for measuring and getting the delta between what things were like before and what things are like now in terms of generally. But then you're all going to sit back and say, well, why did they say that? Why? Why did they say that? And then we're going to jump down to all the answers that are in the qualitative answers at the bottom of the survey, but they're not matched to the question that was asked, right? I mean, sometimes you can figure it out. But what if we could look at this, have a sense of quantitatively where we were and where we have come in terms of direction? Okay, so now I've introduced the concept of direction versus goal, right? Without saying, get rid of all your goals. Right? I've said, what if we could understand that better and we could start to see patterns and kind of where it coalesces and put some filters in there that help us understand, how that relates to women's experience, right? And that's how I'm introducing concepts without getting into a bunch of jargon or having to explain the theories. But it all starts with them. If you keep it all focused on them, And you have your conversations about apparected and your arguments about obvious versus clear in the background over coffee or in the bar with lots of smart people who are more theoretical, then you're better prepared to in that when you're sitting across from a client to being able to draw on that stuff without banging it or pulling out a slide deck or whatever. That's just my personal experience.
Can I just say that all of you are free to come to the Complexity Lounge and use the word apparatic as often as you like.
Exactly.
And
that's the place. This is the place to do it. Yeah.
We're a safe space for complexity language, my friends.
Yes. Right. And thank you for saying that, Barbara, because I don't want to give the impression that I don't care about the theory. I wouldn't have been able to work with Dave Snowden for a couple of decades if I didn't want to talk about it.
I think you run across a problem when we try to simplify the language, because when we land on a simplified term, that term oftentimes have pre-existing baggage, right? So sometimes you want to introduce those terms that nobody knows what they mean so that you can define it for that context so that you can move forward. So it's a balancing act, because we're always talking about language in the lounge here.
You know what? That's a good point, Jocko. And I'm glad you said that, because I will use terminology but it's all about when I think that person's ready, where we are in the process of talking with each other about the opportunity. And once they're hooked, that it is really about something that they care about, then they're much more open to the use of a certain amount of language. You don't want to be imprecise. Absolutely not. But that's why I use the word direction. Direction's a term that's not, that's not difficult to understand. And it's not so technical that they can't. But then you can say later, you can then use it to say, a lot of times people want to set goals or targets. And here's the challenge of doing that in this particular when you're in complex space, right? And that way it's not like, don't ever set targets, don't ever look for measures, it's, you've got to be
on that exact point. The word I've been using lately is dispositional. Now they go, well, what is that? And I'm going like, great. You don't know what it is.
Yeah,
I'm going to define it for
exactly.
you. Even though I don't exactly know precisely what it is, because if you dig into that term, it gets pretty hairy. But I can use it to get away from targets or whatever purpose I want to use it for, as long as I'm not misusing the term.
Right. Exactly. All right. Let's. Do we have one more? Somebody.
We have David Wolford in the chat, but also Dave Snowden has some strong opinions on what we've been talking about. So, Dave, if you'd like to chime in while I look for the next question I want to introduce,
it's feel free. I mean, new language makes people think differently.
Yes,
so
I'm
agreeing
with that.
There's too much overlay on confused. Yeah, whereas apparatic, you have to explain it. And you say, hey, all Greek school children know this. It's a question to which you do not know the answer. And then they're okay, right? Or, the big thing on computers at the moment, we're saying, look, human beings evolved to think abductively. AI only thinks inductively. Then you have to explain it. But you've got people to realize there's a difference. Like we originally said, complex and complicated.
Right.
So I think if you're dealing with a real world problem, you do not need to explain the theory. If you're in a discussion where you need to explain the theory, you should never compromise on the language.
I agree 100% with. I totally agree on that. And all I'm saying is that in my experience, I have to be really careful about how I use the language.
It's also life cycle, Mary. So most of the time these days, when I'm selling the project, I do not have to explain the theory.
Right.
Because we're now saying into early majority, you want to know what I will get out of this.
Exactly.
Not interested in how you do it.
Right.
When you're selling something early days, you're selling to the enthusiasts. So you have to bring in the theory. Otherwise, they wouldn't take it seriously.
That's a very good point. Really good point. What's the name of that book you love so much, Dave?
Crossing the Chasm.
Crossing the Chasm. Yeah. Read that book if you haven't read it. Because it speaks to what Dave just said. And I do, like I said to Barbara, I don't want to give the impression that I don't think language is important and that I don't think theory is important. I just think that you have to have a strategy with different clients for how it gets introduced and how you.
I will say the other thing is, as a deadly weapon on your side is somebody with a South Carolina accent.
Yeah.
Who can take apart people criticize you in a way that you can't yourself. That was our second where she kept some appreciative inquiry people apart in a way that I couldn't. But that accent makes a difference. That southern drawl is really effective for criticism.
However, you don't want to try to fake it.
No,
that won't work.
And she's
No,
naturally
you don't
cool.
want to. You don't want to try to fake it. You don't want to try to fake the Southern accent, and you don't want to try to fake that you know more about complexity in the language than you do.
Right, but also, Mary, you are naturally polite and well-mannered.
Yeah.
Which
vicious underneath it, really vicious underneath.
Yeah,
that's fine. That's fine.
Well,
I mean,
only when I have to defend my friends. But you have to do it. Yes, you have to you have to do it so that people can hear it.
Okay.
So we got to. Moving on. Sorry, go ahead, Barbara.
David, and you can mull this over while we're in a breakout, but David wants to know, at the risk of retrospective coherence, can you walk us through an experience with a client or two or some challenge and how you walk through these points and what happened?
Sure.
Any aha moments? That's
sure.
So,
let me use the SenseMaker project that I've been kind of alluding to this whole time. That first of all, I didn't want to apply SenseMaker until, in my client community, until I really felt I really had a handle on how it worked and understood it and, and knew when to bring it in. Because what I didn't want to do was introduce it, and I don't understand it well enough, or I don't introduce it well enough that then I don't introduce it at the right time, for example. And then the client doesn't want to do it, then coming back again and trying to get them to use it again is a big challenge. So, so I had this client, I had them for almost a year before I had an opportunity that I thought was a really good opportunity. And it was a point at which, and I'm not saying you have to always wait a year to work with a client. It depends on the client, depends on the circumstances. But this client was very highly skeptical. It's a proprietary trading company, and that's a difficult environment to introduce things in. Tons of quant heads and smart people and algorithms out the wazoo, and very to the point. They don't abide if they don't understand it right away, they don't want to talk about it. If they don't see the value right away, they don't want to talk about it. And so I finally found a point where these executives are really struggling with this female retention and recruitment problem. And I had a client that was really going to work with it to help me politically maneuver behind the scenes to really ensure that people listened, that they participated. We needed really high level participation. And so because I had the client that I knew had the political skills and had access to the money to do something, I knew it was the right problem, right time, and right place. I introduced it. It took a few weeks to get all through the process, but they brought it in, and this client had a lot of money to spend, so resources are not a problem. I told Anna in Dave's organization that we don't worry about the budget, right? Everything, pull out the stops. I want to do the whole everything. I want help, report, all this stuff. And so we did it. And we when we were designing the prompts and doing all the work, it became very clear that there were things that they hadn't thought to ask about, but that we were able to integrate into the process and integrate into the research. And what was so interesting about it, when we had all the executives around the table, we got it through and got the project approved pretty much behind the scenes. But once we got the information out in front of them, this is a group of people who have given barely a thought to the HR side of the work. To them, it's all about the traders. right? And the people, the other side of the organization, they're not thinking about the support organization, or they didn't have as much focus on them at the time. It had grown from a tiny little handful of people to 1,600 employees. And so it was full of revelations, not just about how women could be retained, but they uncovered that they just had really some serious challenges and serious levels of capabilities in their managerial level. And it was a shock to them. And that moment of recognition that they had some serious challenges that they needed to deal with at the managerial level was really something to watch. And the ability, because these people are kind of quantitatively oriented and math and science oriented, they kind of geeked out a little bit on being able to do some of the stuff. SenseMaker can just do a lot of really cool things in terms of slicing and doing the data differently. And so as a result, the CEO is just now, there's a new person that's come in that wants to introduce pulse surveys in a classic HR platform, an engagement platform. And so she's got the limelight right now. But so again, smartly, we're sitting back and waiting for her first project to go out there and for them to say, wait a minute, well, why? Why did they say this? So you have to kind of read the political situation and make decisions about how to introduce things and when to introduce things. And in terms of what those executives had known about complexity theory before all this project started, I had done an offsite with them. That was my first intervention with them. And I introduced the Cynefin framework to them. And I talked to them about complex adaptive systems. But I did that. It was an executive retreat. It was just one little part of what I introduced. I kind of teased them a little bit with that information. But then that became really manifestly clear to them what all that meant when they actually saw it in action with the SenseMaker project. So I don't know if that meets your requirements, David, but that's an example.
Well, I thought
that's great.
I thought that was a great one.
Okay, great. So I want to get this one to one last one really quickly. And I know, you guys have already been in a breakout before, and we're going to do it in a very similar way. I think we're only going to be able to take about 20 minutes for this because we're kind of running up to close to the end. But this one's going to be a little bit different. This one's going to be about what are we doing on this one? Sorry. We're going to be the key challenges. That's it. As you face the key challenges you're facing in trying to implement this or introduce it, when you're trying to introduce these things, when you're trying to work with clients, or you're thinking about working with clients, what are some of the key challenges you're facing in doing that? We've talked a little bit about how to address them, and I've given an example, but you guys may have some of your own, some ways that are working really well to either get into a client situation or to sustain that intervention. And so right now, get out your pencil and paper again, and let me share. I want you to jot down one or two key challenges you have in introducing or implementing complexity approaches. So just take about 30 seconds to do that. Could be challenges locating the right clients, getting people to complete projects, getting sponsors and clients to take risks, whatever key challenges you have. Okay. Now what I'd like you to do, we're going to use the same kind of process. You're going to, if you're in a new group and you have new people, introduce yourselves. If you already know each other, then you don't have to do that because a lot of you know each other. But I want you to quickly take the same approach. Let each person speak for a second to talk about what their challenge is, so each voice gets heard in the room. And then discuss your examples with each other for the remaining time. And so we're going to probably take about 20 minutes for this. I'm not going to give you all those reminders because you've done it once now. So I think you're probably good to go on that. So very simply, go on, introduction, let each person say what the challenge is, and then you're on for the next probably 15, 17 minutes or so. Okay. Come back, everybody. Hey, thanks for coming back. And I just wanted to say we were talking, the co-hosts, and Dave was in with us for a few minutes, and we were talking about the fact that I am a big cheerleader for SenseMaker, but I don't make any money from being I don't charge any commission or anything like that. So I wanted to make sure that everybody was certain that I'm not doing a commercial for something I'm going to directly benefit from. So I truly believe that's what I've done my whole consulting career, is that whenever I recommend any kind of approach or any kind of tool or anything like that, I've never, ever taken one single commission or profited from it, because then I don't have any credibility if I do that. So just to make that clear, right, Barbara?
Yeah, and I mean, Jocko and I can't get people to pay us. So
yeah.
Nobody.
We're willing. It's just we're not. Nobody's biting.
Right. Yeah, nobody will give us any money. Okay. So yes, thanks, Mary.
So anyway, what happened in your conversations? Was there anything? Did somebody come up with some solutions or challenging problems that didn't come up with a solution? We've got a good group here of all heads together. If there was one that was particularly sticky or particularly helpful, how did it go?
Oh, come on.
Good, Yulia, good. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, sure. We were talking that specifically in the situation of business schools, when the students might be very unexperienced in their second, third semester, so they might have not seen so much of the complex stuff, or otherwise they're seeing it very abstract. So for them, explaining what Hobbit is or what the Lord of the Ring is might be talking to them in much more detail than, I don't know, explaining how Go as a game goes, because sometimes they just do not have the relevant experience and they're living in their own info bubbles. And when I'm asking which games do they play, and they say like Crazy Birds, and then like what am I supposed to connect then with that? So we came up with the idea of turning this into sapiophilic, nerdy, geeky kind of session, which is out of curricula, so that they can get it, as a extra access, and becoming a little bit of, the thing that nobody else is so deep in. So maybe this could be the idea of, sex is the new black kind of stuff thing. So that might be an idea. I don't know if that works with companies. Maybe there should be some kind of different attitude there, but well, these are the things that we were discussing a little bit.
Right. Awesome. Fernando, were you in the room with Yulia? Oh, perfect. Perfect. Yeah, Anne, let's see. Oh, Anne's got to go. Okay. Thanks, Anne. Anna, sorry. Any other observations, thoughts that should be shared from the breakouts? Was it worthwhile? Good. Okay. Good. A lot of smart people. Yes. Shasta.
I'll just try to synthesize what we were discussing, which kind of started out as different shiny toys that people get in an organization attached to, but that the difficulty in making change or is that executives have a hard time letting go of some control when they don't know what the outcomes are going to be, but that with a lot, and there we were brought up a lot of overlapping things because I'm a UX designer, so that like in design and complexity and agile, that you don't actually ever know the actual solution outcome when you begin. That's the whole point of it, and that is the hard thing for people to overcome when they're trying to, I guess, or when we're trying to get people to buy into different approaches.
You know, that I find that has been true because most of my whole career, I've been trying to get people to do things where I'm not able to tell them what's going to be the outcome at the end. And I couldn't even explain what I did to my mothers ever. So it's tough. But what I found is that's where the relationship comes in and is so important. I've literally turned to my client before in some circumstances and said, just trust me on this. And I've got a relationship that's close enough that they said, okay, but you're screwed if it doesn't work. You know? But actually that don't underestimate the power of the relationship that you have with the client, that you're trying to get some of these things done because, you know, and I'm not saying that there's one type of relationship that's right, but there's one common denominator, and that is that they trust you. They may trust you because of your expertise. They may trust you because you've developed a personal relationship, but whatever the reason they trust you, that trust is essential to being able to get, at least in my experience, getting them to make that leap. And even if they have a really pressing challenge or problem, that helps. But if they don't trust that what you're proposing is going to work, and they don't trust, you know, it's really tough to get them to make the leap that they need to. Other comments, questions? Okay. So I am going to say that what we talked about during the break was talking about the difference between, Jocko's asked the question twice, so I know it was important. The difference between systems thinking and complexity. And Dave, could you tell them in a short, because this was Jocko's question and he's part of the group, could you give us a short synopsis of your answer?
Okay, so you have to talk about different approaches to systems thinking. So you've got systems dynamics, which starts with Forrester and then gets oversimplified with Senge, radically oversimplified. Forrester himself criticized Senge for that. You got cybernetics, which started off as a generic name in the Macy conference for anybody who was thinking about systems, but now generally means Beer's VSM model. I don't think, for example, Bateson falls into modern cybernetics. And I've almost got Nora to agree with me on that. Yeah, well, I think she does agree with me, but getting to go public on it will be hard, right? So you've got cybernetics, and that splits into the sort of Beer VSM stuff, which, and I've always said, if Beer had known about complexity science, he would not have created the VSM model. Yeah, which, yeah. Then you get the pattern language. The pattern language stuff is really interesting, and we're interested in working with that because if we break the granularity down, we can make it complex. So there are aspects of cybernetics which can come across. Mike Jackson is trying with critical systems thinking to sort of resurrect Peter Chaklin stuff, and I work with Peter a lot, yeah, and Frank Land, and that has huge value. The trouble is it doesn't scale, right? And all of those traditions in some way or other really trace back to Shannon and information science, and I've got a huge amount of respect for Shannon, but his concept of information is a signal type concept. It comes from that sort of background. And that's where you can trace complexity science. Now, so complexity science starts with three-body problem in physics. That's the first origin of it. It then comes across in chemistry with Prigogine, in biology with Kaufman, in economics with Brian Arthur. I was with him last Friday, yeah. And now in social systems with a whole range of us, right? And the essential difference is one, most people in systems thinking will define a system as having a boundary. And complexity thinking says no. You know, some systems have boundaries, but it's not a necessary condition of a system. Yeah. So that's one important principle. Another important principle is if you use the "we need to think holistically" word, you don't understand complexity science, because you can't, and you'll just pervert the system. So the three necessary but not sufficient conditions for complexity are lots of actants, highly rich local interactions, and none of the actants must have knowledge of the whole. Because if they claim to have knowledge of the whole, they pervert the system, and then you miss emergence. So complexity management is about stimulating the system, creating monitors in the system, and identifying patterns and reinforcing them very quickly, which is why we talk about the frozen two strategy rather than the goal strategy. All you can do is work out where you are and where you go next. You can't have goals, because goals also pervert the system. Yeah. And I could go on, but and the key thing to understand isn't necessarily negative. Systems thinking was hugely important. I was working with Frank Land at the LSE. But we managed gravity with canals before Newton came along, but then the science comes along and we understand it differently. Right. And to respect the past is not necessarily want to carry on with the past, I think, is the key phrase here.
Great. Thank you very much for that brief answer. And it was, and I mean, summarizing that question in that amount of time is very impressive. I appreciate that, and I appreciate Jocko's question, and I think it just illustrates the importance of what Barbara was saying before, is that there's a cohort here that can really dig into something like that and really understand these differences, because you could very well get a client or a customer asking, or client really is the right word, asking, what's the difference? I've heard of this systems theory. What's the difference with others? So really, you got to know your stuff on this, because you're going to run across the clients that are going to want to know at a deeper level what you're talking about, and that affects your credibility. So very important to have the right language, understand the terms, have a grounding in all of that theory, but also important to recognize where they are. And those are the three key things I want you to take away from, at least from my part of what we've talked about today. And number one is that there's no substitute for curiosity, yours and the client's. Number two, always, 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 always do your homework. And number three, it's really important to remember that it's all about them. It's not all about you. So that whatever you bring forth from complexity is not to advertise your knowledge or whatever of superiority in terms of understanding it intellectually, but rather it's all about them, to make sure that you're doing it in service of what it is they're trying to get accomplished. So those are the three things that I would leave you with. And I really appreciate that you guys taking so much time out of your day. Dave, thank you so much for coming, because I know personally how busy you are, and I'm sure the rest of you are just as busy. And I appreciate your attention. And thanks for inviting me, Jocko and Barbara and Tiana. And I really appreciate it.
Mary, we can't thank you enough. This has been awesome. I learned a lot. Dave, thanks. And you are welcome anytime. I think the audience would love to hear more from you. So always keep us in mind.
Okay, great.
Thank you to all of you for coming today. We do this because we want all of you to have a place to talk about this stuff. And we'll see you next time. So thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.